Hey everybody, and welcome to a really special science-themed episode of The Point. I am your guest host today, Cara Santa Maria, and when I'm not guest hosting or a panelist on The Point or The Young Turks, I am the senior science correspondent at the Huffington Post, and you can check out my column called Talk Nerdy to Me. Yes, nerdy, not dirty, if you go to HuffPost Science and just click on the link. We have a really exciting episode today. We've got some great points coming in. The first one is from journalist and author Chris Mooney, and he wrote The Republican Brain, The Science of Why They Deny Science and Reality, and he's going to be talking about the differences in how we think across the political divide. Second, we've got Stanford University education professor Linda Darling-Hammond, and she's got a point about the state of science education in this country. And then lastly, we have Phil Plait. He's the Bad Astronomer. He blogs for Discover magazine, and his point is about asteroid mining, which we learned the other day on The Daily Show by Neil deGrasse Tyson is not bullshit. But before we get started with those, let me go ahead and introduce my panel. I'm really excited about them. To start, we've got scientist turned comedian Tim Lee. He's also known as the YouTube comedian, right? And you gave up a career in biology for comedy.
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah, I spent 6 years at UC Davis getting my PhD in ecology and evolution, so obviously I'm a masochist. I figured the only way I could keep up that level of pain and frustration would be start over in comedy.
Why not?
And so I've done that. But it's not as different as people think, because I used to give talks in front of smart people who try and pick apart my logic, and now I give talks in front of drunk people who try and pick apart my jokes.
And since then, you've amassed more than 4 million views on YouTube. That's really impressive.
Yep.
Great. And I also want to welcome Casey Cole. She is a longtime science writer. I really look up to her a lot. She's also the professor at the USC Annenberg School and the author of 8 books, including your most recent, Something Incredibly Wonderful Happens, Frank Oppenheimer and the World He Made Up, a memoir biography of the self-proclaimed uncle of the atomic bomb.
Right, and founder of the Exploratorium in San Francisco, a museum of human awareness, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So
I'm excited.
Cool.
And also we have Max Lugavere, a longtime friend of mine. He's also a journalist, singer-songwriter, and documentary filmmaker, and he was one of the very first producers and hosts on Current TV.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a great time, and you know, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I'm a huge fan of science. I write about like science-themed things as a blogger for the Huffington Post. I'm not a senior science correspondent, but I love it. And I was just recently given my own blog on Psychology Today, which I'm really psyched about. No pun intended.
It's really exciting, and so. I've known Max, like I said, for some time, and I'm really getting to know Casey now. Tim, I've never met you before, so I hope you'll win me over tonight.
It's your gift for today.
Great, so why don't we go ahead and get started. We'll look at our first point, which comes to us from Chris Mooney.
Hi, my name is Chris Mooney. I'm a science and political journalist, and my point today is that we need to think about why people deny science, why they deny reality, things that are just objectively true, in a different way. In 2005, I did a book called The Republican War on Science, and its argument was that when it comes to conservatives denying global warming, denying evolution, the reason is simple. They're allied with groups that do this. They're allied with the religious right. They're allied with corporate America, the fossil fuel industry. So if you want to understand the behavior, you either follow God or you follow the money, and you find your explanation. Was that wrong? It's not exactly wrong, but I think it's now inadequate. And in the new book, it's called The Republican Brain, The Science of Why They Deny Science and Reality. Not such a tactful plug there, but in the new book, I say it's deeper than this. We've got a vast body of evidence, psychological now, that liberals and conservatives are just different people, process information differently. They have different psychological needs. Liberals are more open to new experiences and new information. They're more tolerant of nuance, ambiguity, uncertainty, and change. Conservatives, less so on those dimensions, more decisive, more inclined to see the world in black and white. This affects everything. It suffuses our politics, and it drives people to process information differently and respond differently. And that has a lot to do with the denial of science and the denial of facts that we see all around us today. So if you want to understand the phenomenon, you just can't just stay at the surface of politics any longer. You really also have to go inside the brain.
So my first question is for you, Tim. Chris talks about in his new book how it's really more than just ideology that separates liberals and conservatives. He says that it goes a little bit deeper. It goes to the neurology, to the neuroscience behind these ideas, and really that there are fundamental personality types that kind of dictate whether or not you will have conservative or liberal viewpoints. If that's true, how does it bode for the future of our country if we're compromised across the divide?
It's an interesting point. I think it seems to be a little bit overanalyzed. I think basically, in terms of science acceptance, a lot of it's driven by self-interest. You know, conservatives tend to be afraid of the fact that, well, the two issues were evolution and climate change.
Those are big ones, big
They're big ones. They're big
yeah.
ones. Yeah. That climate change is going to cost. Acting on is going to cost people a lot of money, and they're going to foot most of the taxes that do that, and so it's not in their interest to believe it, and so it's going to be much more difficult for them to accept that. And then the other one with evolution, you know, it tends to be tied to religion, and I found that the best way to talk to people about that is, especially Christianity, which is New World, is to talk about the Christians who do accept evolution, namely the Pope, who's actually a very devout Christian, and has been able to incorporate evolution and a belief in God together. I think they're very afraid that evolution is going to take people to atheism, and therefore they can't accept that.
I think that's a huge part of the problem, but I also think that what Chris is saying is that if we kind of go below and look at these fundamental thought processes or these fundamental personality types in individual people, that you'll see things like, you know, liberals are more open to new experiences, whereas conservatives are more fearful. And we've even seen some neurological changes in their brains. Like, for example, there's more amygdala mass in a conservative versus a liberal. And a conservative person, you know, like Stephen Colbert's truthiness, talks about thinking with your gut.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, an amygdala is the fear center of the brain, right? So it would make sense that in somebody who's more black and white in their thinking, more, you know, more resistant to change, that they would have sort of a more active fear center, you know? And then, now correlation doesn't always equal causation, but then they would be more prone to sort of like soothing religious beliefs, perhaps, you know? And so, yeah, I'm totally interested in the neuroscience of why people, you know, think the way they do. I think it's not the most politically correct route, for sure, to explain, you know, people's behaviors and thought processes and whatnot. But
I think
it's fascinating.
I think it is, and I love Chris Mooney and I love his work, but I'm going to disagree with him on this one because from a neuroscience point of view, we're all stupid in this regard. And it's partly because we're working on the lizard brain, the ancient brain, the brain that works really fast and does not go through the cortical stuff, which takes longer, I mean, quite a bit longer to process. I was recently at a meeting of the American Chemical Society, and somebody showed this great slide of it was a health food store in Princeton, New Jersey, and a sign out front, you know, on a chalkboard saying chemical-free sunblock and chemical-free bug spray. And these people are not Republicans, okay?
That's true.
There is a lot on the loony left that is as anti-science, truly, as there is on the right. So I do think that neuroscience has a lot to do with why we are normally, as a people, all of us tend to go for that gut reaction, but sometimes in wanting what's natural and chemical-free, that kind of thing, the left does it too. The Republicans, with the religion and the climate change, those definitely are gut. They go to the gut issues of fear of change. So yeah, but I think it is deeper than that. It's something that affects all of us.
But don't you think that this is kind of a nuanced conversation? And I remember being a panelist on the show a few weeks ago and talking about these political differences and the difference between kind of selling your political ideology in a nuanced way or in a very black and white way. And we know that black and white sells. It really, you know, people respond to that. But, you know, I've had some conversations with Chris, and it seems like some of the things that he's arguing is that liberals think in a more nuanced way, whereas conservatives think in a more kind of authoritarian way. And so maybe these very anti-science views that even come in on the liberal side, that's where the anti-vaxxers live, right? That's where I'm afraid of Gen Mod foods, I'm afraid of anything, which is hilarious, like chemicals. everything's a chemical, you know. But maybe that's a function of over-analyzing these things to the point where there's just not a fundamental science base. You know, these people don't have a fundamental science background, maybe they're not quite as scientifically literate, so it's difficult to tell the difference. A big one that I see a lot of times is with a fear of pharmaceutical medicine, because there's a difficulty separating kind of biomedical research from big pharma.
Yeah, business. I think that's valid. One of the things I'd like to get to about these brain studies, which is kind of a statistical problem, is that the more regions you break the brain into, the easier it is to find a difference. And so they're focusing on the amygdala. So it's called a multiple comparison study. And if we took just two random groups, we took plumbers and parking lot attendants, and we looked at one thing, like the brain size, we probably wouldn't find a difference. But you start breaking it into 50 different regions, and you're going to find a difference. And so there's a little bit of hunting, and then you'll just justify why the difference is.
But the brain is relatively compartmentalized, like we know this. And if you are studying, you know, you have a large enough sample size, and you're comparing two different groups, it seems reasonable to me that if multiple studies are showing these significant differences between groups. He also mentioned that liberals in a few studies have been associated with having a little bit more gray matter in the interior cingulate cortex, which is kind of what we're talking about, is that, you know, lizard brain versus more cortical thinking.
But they don't start off, the problem is with this kind of a design is you don't start off with an idea that we think originally they're more fearful, therefore their amygdala is
Of course.
going to be
I mean,
larger.
this is a chicken and egg situation too. Are these individuals fundamentally like this because of their personality type, or was it nurtured throughout their experience?
Part of what I was going to say, it may have causality, you know, as you were mentioning, a little confused here, because one thing we do know is that the more you know, oddly, I mean, a lot of this comes out of Dan Kahneman's book, which you know I'm crazy about, Thinking Fast and Slow. The more you know, the less certain you are. So it's true that scientists and often progressives and liberals want to know more and therefore seem less certain and not as fast to come. So the causality may be a little bit.
It's truthiness.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a little confused in that. Is that what?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating. And then, you know, I mean, it's nowhere written that, you know, somebody on the right has to have, you know, strongly held religious beliefs, but they just so happen to.
So speaking of, you know, this kind of religiosity component of this, I think it's really interesting. I have some statistics here that, you know, the percentage of individuals who believe in creationism versus evolution. With Democrats, 38% of Democrats believe in creationism. 17% believe in no God guiding evolution, and 39% believe in God-guided evolution, which those numbers seem kind of high to me, versus Republicans, where 60% believe in creationism, only 4% say that there was no God guiding evolution, and 32% say that evolution is a legitimate process, but it was guided by God, and independents fall somewhere in between. What does that say to you?
Well, I mean, nothing says I'm uncomfortable with uncertainty quite like believing in God, right? I mean, in my opinion, like, not
we'll qualify that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, so there's clearly like a correlation there with people that are perhaps less comfortable with uncertainty, maybe a sort of, you know, a more, you know, blood-engorged amygdala, and one's political beliefs. I mean, it's, you know.
But I also think we do a really bad job at talking about intelligent design, and it plays into this. Evolution is complicated. So when we say that people believe in intelligent design, they say, well, evolution couldn't possibly produce such a rich array of life as humans and all this other stuff. It is unbelievable. I mean, the fact is, it is unbelievable in the same way the fact that we're living on a sphere, you know, and some people are dangling up, that's down, you know, there. And I mean, these things are unbelievable. The reason we know they're true is because of evidence. And we don't stop to say, even in a sentence, evolution is true because we have all these pieces of evidence. But yeah, the gut feeling is how can it be true? I mean, how can we all have evolved from some, and I think we need to acknowledge that a little bit. I think we'd get farther.
And I think that just the way that we talk about these things can be problematic. I mean, even just now when I was looking at my notes, I was saying, you know, the number of people that believe in evolution, which is a huge semantic problem. I mean, I did a piece recently for my column at HuffPost Science about prayer, and I talked about whether or not prayer works. And so we talked first about intercessory prayer, and of course we know through many, you know, experiments that it doesn't work. And then I talked a little bit about whether or not prayer can be beneficial for the person who's praying. And the response that I get from people who basically just made up their minds, it doesn't matter what kind of evidence you put in front of them. This is really problematic. You can say, look, we have looked at this thing scientifically, we have examined the problem, we've had a double-blind control study, and you know, the evidence doesn't show that prayer works. And people go, well, I don't trust your science.
I prayed to be a guest on The Point.
Here you are.
You gotta up your
I mean, that's
stakes.
the problem, because people feel, they have this emotional connection to anecdotes. And of course, if you pray for enough things in life, those things are going to come true.
Sure, yeah, that's
you know?
another multiple comparison problem there. But back to the other problem.
The statistician over here.
No, I think evolution is very complicated, and it's you know, difficult to understand. And Darwin's contribution to evolution was natural selection, not the idea of change, but the process that made the change occur. And then, of course, genetics didn't come along until after, basically, he passed away. So they had no mechanism of knowing. And it's very complicated. You know, gene frequencies change, but some things are very simple to understand. Like we know that tuberculosis has evolved and we need to change our antibiotics. So you can talk to people about that, things that are evolving before our eyes. Some plants have evolved, new plant species have evolved in North America while we're alive. And those are things that are just happening before our eyes.
The argument, though, is that how does this translate to a person who is thinking with their gut?
If I can just throw out something there, I have a very Republican family. Okay. And I remember my brother calling me when I was at a physics meeting in Florida and saying, so are scientists like liberals? And I had the satisfaction of being able to say, duh. But the problem is, he's also explained to me that they think we look down on them. And that's part of the reason that they go no to science, because they think we're being arrogant.
Sure.
And they're right.
Elitist educated.
They're right.
Yeah.
But as long as you don't acknowledge that something they're saying is right, we have no way, because then they'll go immediately into the fear. It's God, I don't believe you, I prayed, it worked. You have to open up some avenue for discussion that doesn't put people on the defensive always.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame. I mean, I wish that, like, you know, a world that embraces science and innovation and, you know, perhaps the conservative mind could sort of cohabitate and live in harmony. It's just that when they try to get in the way of things like stem cell research and, you know, the sort of pro-life movement, I mean, it's mind-blowingly infuriating, you know, that political ideology or religious ideology would get in the way of, like, you know, stem cells, you know, helping someone recover that was paralyzed or something like that, you know?
Sure. I mean, when southern states are trying to push legislation that allows teachers in elementary and middle school public science classes to teach alternate theories to things like evolution and global warming, this is a big problem. We're going to discuss some of these issues when we look at a point that was given to us by Stanford University School of Education professor Linda Darling-Hammond right after this break. Welcome back to The Point. Let's go ahead and check out our second point.
My name is Linda Darling-Hammond. I'm a professor at Stanford University and the author of The Flat World in Education, How America's Commitment to Equity Will Determine Our Future. And my point is this: we have to save science in this country, and currently we are strangling science education. Almost all of the important problems that we need to solve globally, the global warming disaster, the need for health care and food and clean water requires serious science. We have been the most innovative country in the world and one of the most economically advanced because of our investments in science and technology. And yet, at this moment, we are rapidly killing science in our public schools. There are two reasons for this. One of them is that under the Bush initiative, No Child Left Behind, we began to focus all of our attention on high-stakes testing in reading and mathematics, multiple choice tests that are driving the curriculum, and many schools are not even teaching science in the United States at this point. Secondly, a lot of the places that are teaching science are teaching it in that sort of memorization and regurgitation fashion that the high-stakes tests demand. And what we're not doing is getting kids involved in many schools in investigation, in problem solving, in the kind of curiosity and creativity that science ought to be developing. While our competitors in places like Singapore are infusing science into every part of their curriculum. Kids are doing experiments and problem solving, and that's in fact how they even do their assessments. The second way we're killing science in American schools is by disinvestment in public education. In places all over the country, we've cut millions and millions of dollars out of public schools. One of the first things to go is science. H.G. Wells once said that civilization is really a race between education and disaster. If we want to win that race, we've got to begin reinvesting in science in our schools.
So I want to start by asking you, Casey, do you agree with Dr. Darling-Hammond's assessment that the two biggest problems facing science education today are reduced funding and standardized testing?
Yeah, well, let's start with standardized testing, because I think that's, one of the main ones. I wanted to add to her quote Mark Twain's reflection that you should, or advice that you should never let school interfere with learning. And we've basically killed science by turning it into a set of answers to be memorized and spewed out on a test, as opposed to a set of questions and mysteries, which is what it's really about. So on that level, she's absolutely correct. And I think it goes even further than that. I think what she's saying without saying it is that what we've lost is that inquiry-based, hands-on feeling for stuff, for science, for the natural world, by doing it in this abstract manner. And I'm sorry, I promised I wouldn't mention physics, but I have to. I read a story for the New Yorker about a subject, neutrino oscillations. It's extremely complicated. I knew the physics was going to be complicated. We talked forever. We used metaphors, equations, everything. And then finally, I remembered that years ago, I'd spent a lot of time playing at the Exploratorium in San Francisco with pendulums, with coupled pendulums. And I got it. I mean, I understood what it was. If you had asked me 20 years ago when I was playing with those pendulums, if I'd learned anything, the answer would have been no. So our assessment is all off on when people learn things and when they don't. And that hands-on component is just critical.
Yeah, I mean, when I was teaching at the university level, I was very lucky to start off as a TA, like most graduate students do, and teach labs first, and then you get into teaching lecture later. And I think that, what Dr. Darling-Hammond was trying to say, A, is that we don't have labs anymore in a lot of schools, which is super dangerous, and B, there's kind of this disconnect between the lab work and the lecture work. I think a big problem that I've noticed in my writing and looking at the responses of people who read my column or who watch my videos is that people don't understand what the word science means. They don't understand that it's a verb and not a noun. I have people tweet at me and say, actually one time somebody tweeted at me and said, damn science, it's the reason I have bird shit on my car, or something like that. And I was like, no, science is the reason we have great cleaners to take it off. Science is how we interact with nature, how we explain nature. Nature just is. Science is a process, a man-made process for understanding the natural world and interacting with it, manipulating it, learning from it. And this is a huge disconnect, I think, with the general public.
I want to tell one more story.
Go ahead.
Really quick story. Okay, here's the other one, again, from my mentor, Frank Oppenheimer, the uncle of the atom bomb. He used to talk about the way he liked to hike in the mountains, and he would start off, and it would be very arduous, but he would find a little place where fairy slippers grew, or a secret stream, or all these wonderful things. He'd get to the top, there'd be this great view, and so he'd run down to get his friends, and they'd be tired, and the hiking would be hard, and they'd get to the top and see the view, but they'd never want to do it again. And he said, that's how we teach science. We drag people up so they can get to the top, the end, the goal, and we never let them enjoy the journey, and that's it. They get out of school, goodbye, it's
That's
over.
so true. It's so overwhelming. It's so funny that the first course you take, like Bio 101, Physics 101, they throw so much at you. And then all of your advanced courses are subunits of that very first kind of umbrella class.
I was hooked in bio in the first year, like it was freshman year of high school, my biology class. I remember reading The Hot Zone by Richard Preston, I think his name was, and I was so intent on becoming a virologist after reading that book. I was just so fascinated by, like, a virus's ability to wreak such havoc upon, a biological system. I think, as kids, we all start out as wonder junkies, junkies for awe and inspiration. And then over time, we just, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like the school system, as Ken Robinson says, like the school system hasn't really changed since it was invented, and it's largely structured hierarchically so that it prepares children for work, which, like, as adults we're like, well, you need a job, but as a child it must be so incredibly boring. I feel like we need to, like, inspire kids, like science. There's nothing more
riddling.
That's exactly what we
I
need.
get them to sit in their seats and pay attention.
The truth is that kids naturally are scientists. Adult functioning scientists in the lab, in the workforce, think the way that children think. How does this work? If I take it apart, can I put it back together? Why? The chain of the why question.
Totally.
That goes into some kind of weird, mystical place that you can't describe.
Because science is not a black and white field of study at all. It's actually one of the most creative fields that you can go into. It's like, I'm sure you've read Jonah Lehrer's book, the new book that he came out with, Imagine How Creativity Works. One of the fundamental benefits of having such a large brain and being a human is that you can sort of imagine futures that don't quite exist or possibilities that have never existed. And that's what science is. You're imagining things that don't yet exist, and then you set out trying to prove them or trying to figure them out. Right?
And you fail a lot in the process, which I think is the other really important thing that she points out in terms of how we evaluate. We talk about risk-taking all the time at the university anyway. We want students to take risks, but we have no way to reward them for that. And science is about, dead ends and having to throw up your hands and start all over again. And we have nothing built in for any kind of digression at all.
Even in some of the best science classes, it's, let's tackle this problem. You've got a week and a half to do it. Come up with your conclusions, write a lab report. And the kids are feeling like, unless I can solve this problem, I'm going to fail. And that's even in good classes where there is a lot of hands-on learning.
Yeah, I think some things that I'm excited about are self-directed learning, which they've been doing some experiments with in both India and here, where there's a blend of play into the learning, where people get to go in the avenues that explore the avenues that they're interested in. I think education is a lot about a balance of curiosity and boredom. And if we can get people curious and away from boredom, learning happens. And it doesn't have to be a formal process.
And encourage failure. I mean, what do you think Richard Branson would say about failure? It's probably his greatest mentor.
But the other thing that Ken Robinson also said was that great quote about, professors view their bodies as ways to convey their brains from one lecture to another. Is that you don't learn just up here. We learn with emotion. You have to get excited. You have to involve yourself on every physical, emotional level. And we don't allow that with science. So we separate science from art. We separate all of these things, or comedy, which are not.
And kids learn differently. The truth is, what I always found with my students back when I was an instructor was that they would get stuck on something that felt too hard. There's a sticking point all the time in almost every science class where it's like, I'm never going to get this. It's just too hard. And if you can help them get past that sticking point, and one of the only ways to do it is to be empathetic and to figure out what it is they're getting hung up on. I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit and give you this information here on the 2009, I've got to read this because otherwise I'll flub it, the 2009 International Program for International Student Assessment Science Tests, U.S. 15-year-olds scored 17th compared to other nations, well behind Finland, South Korea, Japan, New Zealand, and Canada. And kind of moving from that young student up to the college level, in 2006, 36.2% of U.S. doctoral degrees in the sciences and 63.6% in engineering were earned by foreign students. What is it about how we are performing in science compared to other developed nations.
Yeah.
Science and nature. Other developed nations. I mean, and why is it so important, this American exceptionalism? Do we really need to lead the way?
Which question? First question. First question, I just have to say, having a lot of international students, so students from China in particular, are so much more comfortable with science, and they really explain it as the difference between our curriculum being an inch deep and a mile wide. We try to throw everything, just exactly what we were talking about, where they make sure that everybody gets the basics and then wants to go on. And is it important? It's not American exceptionalism, but American keeping up. Our national security is all about that. I mean, our national security has always been very much tied to how good we are in science.
And our economy.
And our economy.
Yeah.
If we lose that, I mean, we're really in deep doo-doo. I think these are very serious
Well, we're already
concerns.
losing that, and we're already in deep
Exactly. It's a
shit.
serious
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's definitely a problem with the educational system, but I also think that like parents shouldn't have a get out of jail free card too. I mean, we are talking about a country where you probably know the statistic. I don't know, like 90% of people believe in angels or something crazy like that. Probably butchered
At least
it. But
70, yeah.
something
I
like
think
that.
it's high. Yeah, I think it's like 84 or 86%.
It's something like
I just saw this.
mind-blowing.
Believe that God answers prayers. At least I know that.
Well, there you go. We want to like breed scientists. I feel like we should. I'm a big fan of like Malcolm Gladwell and his idea of like concerted cultivation and just putting kids in as many sort of novel, interesting sorts of environments as possible. And raising kids with like this sort of entitlement about the world, creativity. Not entitlement in sort of like a
Kids are entitled
in a negative
nowadays.
way.
I see it all the
But-
time. I mean, I used to see it all the time when I was teaching.
Entitled to understand.
creative entitlement.
Oh, I
Entitled
see.
to
I
understand,
see.
yeah.
Taking it somewhere else.
But
You're absolutely right. But you know what? My question is, this all sounds very expensive.
no.
And are we prepared to invest in these kinds of educational environments?
What is expensive about
Yeah.
encouraging curiosity?
I guess a
and
big
play?
part of what's expensive is training good teachers, paying good teachers to want to be invested in that. I mean, our teachers
Yeah.
are really underpaid. I mean, that's a huge problem that we didn't even touch on with this point. And they're beholden to the curriculum. We
Yeah.
dump. I guess that's true. The money is in the wrong places.
Right, but the other thing is, as I started out with that Mark Twain thing, of course, everybody attributes everything to Mark Twain, so it may or may not be true. But what you were saying, it doesn't all have to happen in school. I mean, school may not be the only place. And as you are doing with comedy, and as I do with science and culture things, and that people are doing all over the place, these programs that combine science and arts, they do them for children, they do them for adults. They're wildly popular, they're exploding, and so maybe we can't do it in school first. Maybe it has to come in another direction.
Well, yeah, driving interest is really the most important thing, because if you're interested, you will learn.
Yeah.
That's basically what it gets down to, and not forcing people to do rote memorization and going on, which is boring.
Yeah, which
Matter-
is really boring.
But there's been an article in the New York Times recently looked at a school district in North Carolina, in Mooresville, that switched their teaching style based on more self-directed, and they've actually saved money. I mean, all the kids have a laptop, but they've gone way up in test scores, way up in graduation rates, and it was painful, obviously. They have bigger class sizes than they used to, because they had to invest in technology, and that meant getting rid of some teachers. But they found that in the end, it's worked out better having the teacher as more of a consultant when the kids get stuck than it is as having them a lecturer telling them exactly what they need to know and memorize. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important. But also I think we have to make sure that we're inspiring these kids, but also instilling a work ethic in them. Because
that's important. Yeah.
kind of allowing this approach, which I think is a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
In practice, what would you do if your teacher sat you down with, models, for example, or a lot of tools and said, learn something today?
But we know what the answer to that is. I mean, we know what the answer is. Kids build stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
When
they
they're
make stuff.
young.
Well, even it goes through even middle school. I mean, Maya Matark at USC has a big program with robotics.
This is my concern, though, is high school kids. This is where I think things start to really
Well,
fundamentally change.
I think they might misuse it, use it to blow stuff up, that kind of stuff.
That's
But-
okay.
That's fun too.
I love to blow
That's fun too.
stuff up.
That
Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and when we come back, we will look at our third point. Well, welcome back to our special science-themed episode of The Point. We're going to go ahead and take a look at our last point, which was sent to us by Phil Plait, the Bad Astronomer.
Hi, Phil Plait, astronomer and author here. I write the Bad Astronomy Blog for Discover magazine. And my point is, people are not really understanding the point behind asteroid mining. Now, this company, Planetary Resources, has claimed they're going to go out into space and mine asteroids. And what people are saying is that they're going to go and strip these things of gold and platinum and silver and all that kind of stuff, bring it back to Earth, and be rich beyond the dreams of avarice. And it's not like that. What they're going to do is a step-by-step plan. They're going to go up into space with small telescopes to observe these asteroids. Then they're going to go to them, look at them, see what's going on. Then they're going to mine them, but not for these minerals, but instead for water and air. And they're going to make fuel and way station depots for future astronauts. The point being, they have billionaire investors who aren't just looking for a return on investment right away. They have their eye on the far future, decades in advance. They want to establish a permanent human foothold in space. And that's what they want to do first, by creating these depots where they can go and pick up water and air and the sorts of things they need for long-term space exploration. And if I may make a second point, this is critical for mankind. As the Russian rocket pioneer Tsiolkovsky said, the Earth is much too fragile a basket for us to put all of our eggs in.
So I want to ask you, Max, my first question, which is, isn't Phil awesome?
He's awesome.
Actually, I want to know, do you agree with him? Are we going to need these way stations in the not-too-distant future? Do you think we need to get off of this planet soon?
I think we need to take better care of this planet, for sure. I think that it's definitely, just in the spirit of like mankind, and like going to the final frontier and going out into space for resources that, that could potentially help us. Yeah, I mean, it's good to have that know-how. I know that Planetary Resources is, one of the co-founders is Peter Diamandis, who's definitely very invested in the world of privatized space flight and whatnot. It's super interesting. I think, I wish like Bruce Willis was somehow involved. Definitely.
And Aerosmith.
Yeah. I mean, that would definitely, like, as far as PR goes.
Well, I mean, yeah, it seems like do you think that it's something that's necessary? It seems like it's going to be operating kind of on two pegs. A, if we get to a point where Earth is no longer habitable, we're going to need these way stations, and this may be, the first step to doing it. But B, could this be our Sputnik moment? It's been a while. It's been a while since we had a big astronomy awesome event, that really got kids excited the way that we had them during the Cold War.
Well, he's definitely right. At one point, the Earth will not be inhabitable, and that's because our sun will become a red giant.
Well, that's well.
Yeah, so if we want to continue to exist, we do have to get off Earth.
But I mean, apparently,
Yeah.
kind of anthropogenic climate change, we're already in so deep that we can't control the fact that we're going to be 2 degrees centigrade warmer soon. And it's like it's already too late for us to get to how we were. Now we're just trying to prevent further damage. So, I mean, don't these things kind of scare you? Is this the kind of motivation?
Well, I have to, our Sputnik moment, which is definitely going to come because of our lack of investment in a lot of things with science and technology, is probably going to be a cyber attack of some kind, because we have not invested the way that China and India and other countries have in cybersecurity. We're all over the place.
So a big virus.
Get that one out of it's not going to come from space. But I think one of the most interesting things about what he's saying and what you were mentioning is the far vision. Very often the science, as you know, that turns out to be most practical is not undertaken for practical reasons.
Yes.
I mean, they have a vision. They want to go out there. They want to see what's there. They want to see if we can mine it. I mean, we probably use some of those things. So there may not be a direct connect the dots. And I agree, too, that I think the people who are involved in this are impressive and interesting enough to pay attention to
James Cameron.
Yeah, they're explorers. I mean, in truth, they are, explorers at heart. And it seems like having this, this company, Planetary Resources, with all of these kind of independent investors, is the only way something like this would ever happen.
I think
It's too long-sighted. I think it's not short-sighted enough to be something that the government would actually invest in.
Yeah.
Although they are saving NASA a ton of money apparently, because it's incredibly expensive getting water from Earth up into space, and so by doing this, it's like $20,000 per liter of water or something like that.
Well, and how does NASA go to space anymore?
Well, there you go. Rest in peace.
I know, right? I mean, it's rough, and that's a whole different conversation.
But this is what we're talking about. This is billionaires playing. This is what they're doing. I mean, they're not looking for an immediate return, but they've got the money. This is something they want to do, and you can learn from play. And I say, let it go happen. And I find it inspiring that this is almost the same as the plot from Superman 1, where the original planet became uninhabitable, and they had to find a new planet for their son. Yeah.
Why are you smiling right now?
Bruce Willis. How can you go wrong? I mean,
It seems like such an. Well, it seems like a movie that's been made, but it.
It seems like a movie,
Yeah.
right? It seems like something that a lot of people don't believe, which is why I think it's important to be able to make these kinds of points. This is real.
Fun.
Yeah.
This could potentially happen, and in the pretty near future, their proposed timeline here is that they'll be going on an orbital mission within the next 18 to 24 months to kind of demo how this would work. They want to be able to launch the prospecting robot probes within 5 to 10 years, and by 2020, they're hoping that this fuel depot will be in place where they can process the water that they'd be mining out of the asteroids and turn it into liquid hydrogen and oxygen, which is going to be necessary if we're going to be hanging out in space for a long time and we can't come back to Earth.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean,
and
obviously.
I was saying, even if we're not, the technologies that they're going to have to develop to make this happen are going to be enormously useful.
Yeah, what's going to
here.
trickle down from that?
Exactly. It's going to be enormous.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
Good
and
for them.
they're insightful in that the most important thing when you're in space is the things that are most common here on Earth, which are water and oxygen.
Yeah.
Hydrogen.
Now.
Yeah.
So I want to know from you guys, if you had billions of dollars to invest, do you think you would invest in a project like this, or what would you want to put your money into?
I don't know. So the guys from Google who are investing in this, like Larry Page, it's.
Yeah, Larry Page and Eric Schmidt from
Right.
Google.
Well, Larry Page's partner, Sergey Brin, he's investing. I mean, his wife runs 23andMe, which is like a personal genomics company, which I think is awesome. I'm a subscriber there. And, he's putting a lot of money into like Parkinson's research. So it's just kind of the juxtaposition, like he's, one is investing in space technology and another is investing in medicine. I mean, I think that they're equally important, for the furthering of mankind's reach across the universe. But
Do you know where you would put your money?
Where would I put it?
Are you an explorer at heart?
I'm definitely a wonder junkie. So
Yeah.
I don't know what I would do. I mean, James Cameron and Richard Branson, guys like that. I mean, they're definitely tremendously inspiring, just because of the entitlement that they feel that they have to just do awesome shit.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Well, yeah, and in a way, that's what Frank Oppenheimer did. Is I want to do awesome shit, and everybody told him he was crazy, but he did. I would build. I used to say, I never wanted a lot of money. I wouldn't know what to do with it, but I do. I want a super PAC. I want to buy a politician.
Hell yeah.
And try to fix some of these. I mean, I really, really do. And then I'd put exploratory all over the place.
Sure.
well,
I know what I'd do.
What would you do?
I would start buying land in Alaska, and then I would bring back a herd of mammoths and start flying people up there to. First of all, I'm curious as to why mammoths disappeared every time humans came into their territory. So I'd like to see what about their behavior.
What about our behavior?
Yeah, conflicted with human behavior.
Yeah.
Were they easy targets or were they super aggressive? That'd be an easy thing. And I've just always wanted to, I love elephants, and I've always wanted to see a mammoth. So it's doable. If I had the money, I would do it.
No, definitely. It is doable. And that's, I think, a really interesting question, which is, should we be investing in science for science's sake? Should we be,
Yes.
just putting money into exploring, not intending to get anything tangible out of it?
well,
Yeah, I think we all agree that yes, that's the case. But how do we sell that idea to people who think that that's a waste of resources?
I don't know. Well, my real answer to that question, like if I had that kind of money, what I would put it into, I mean, for me, it would be biotech. It would be like stem cell research. It would be, and I know you don't agree with this, but ending aging, I think that like people like Aubrey de Grey that are really at the precipice of like solving the problem of getting older and things not working the way that they used to. Like I think that is something worth investing in.
That was
do it really
sold by
fast,
Viagra.
please.
No, I mean, yeah, I think because innovation doesn't happen in the real world for innovation's sake. It happens according to like commercial interest and what markets dictate. So like, if there was a pill that cured aging and cancer, would Pfizer and Glaxo come out with it? Probably not, because they make so much. I mean, their business model is keeping sick people on the sauce.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, the examples. I mean, one of my favorites, just because people don't realize it, is that your GPS would not work without general relativity, Einstein's curvature of space-time. Sorry, physics, and special relativity, the speed of light, and they don't quite balance out. But the GPS satellites are absolutely dependent on both of those theories. Everything that we have around us that we love and adore came from stuff that everybody thought was wacko, crazy, could never be useful. And we find that over and over. I mean, even if it's penicillin, I mean, that was another accident. But this is a continuing story. Scientists take this for granted, but people don't know it. So scientists now, as you know, when they write their grants, they pretty much have to write them for stuff they've already discovered, because they can't say, we're going to go out there and look around and see what we can find.
Yeah, we're going to mine some asteroids.
Yeah. So it's good that we have these people doing it. It's
General
really great,
research. With general research can become useful in the future, and it has for us because other generations invested in general research.
Sure.
And so it's kind of an obligation to future generations that we do some general research that they might benefit from in the future.
Yeah.
Good point.
Casey, what you said actually reminded me, you were talking about GPSs, which means you were talking about satellites. There's already so much crap kind of in low Earth orbit. There's a lot, actually. We've launched a bunch of stuff into space, and my question is it legal to go mine an asteroid? Who owns an asteroid? Is it one of those, is it an imperialist thing, like we got there first, we put a flag on it?
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder about the legality of this.
The law is very complicated. It's just being developed, and it also applies to things like the seafloor, where the thing started melting and Russia goes down and plants a flag. We planted a flag on the moon. Was that legal? But so I have to tell you about
Do we own the moon?
Here's a really scary conversation. Yes, here's a
We own the moon? Wow.
really scary conversation I had with W's science advisor. W was just the worst for science. And I was talking about the fact of this Moon to Mars mission that we had, which no scientists were behind. I mean, virtually none, to having manned space flights. And so John Marburger, he's a great guy. I mean, he's a physicist, but he says, well, Casey, you have to understand that this is a matter of, private enterprise, and we're going to exploit the moon and Mars for their resources and make them safe for, commercial use. My jaw was on the ground. I could not believe it. But yeah, that's the way people are looking at it, as places we can go.
That's why we want to mine these asteroids.
That's our model. So,
Yeah.
but the law is very interesting and very much developing on these things. I mean, who does own the moon? Who you go plant a flag on Mars? I mean,
It's kind of a moot point if there's no people up there, isn't it?
Well,
not
once we get- the
really,
whole
because
point of
the
this is to
resources.
get us there, right?
Exactly. And imagine this, which is even closer. I mean, we could go to the moon. We could put a big telescope up there, which would be amazing, because you could see anything. There'd be no distortion, including things on Earth. So our spy capabilities, for example, or anything like that
huge
would just
for
be
national security.
would be absolutely huge. So it is important.
Seems like
These-
something that would make sense on the Republican agenda.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Bringing it back around.
Well, Newt Gingrich just apologized. Actually, I heard today coming in that was a really dumb statement, whatever he said
about moon colonies?
about moon colony.
Aw,
exactly.
Newt. I was
Yeah.
kind of on his team with that one.
Were you?
I was. That was the one thing Newt and I had in common, I think. Anyway, I think that this was a really, really, really great episode. It was really exciting, and I want to thank you guys all for being here. I want to thank my wonderfully geeky panelists here. We've got Max Lugavere, and tell us what you have coming up soon, Max.
Lots,
or what you've done recently.
There's lots going on. I guess the best way would be to follow me on Twitter. There's always cool things that I'm doing, appearances, shows.
Awesome. Playing your music?
Playing my music. I have an album on iTunes called 1 Year Later, if you like that. It's not a science-themed album, but maybe in my future.
We'll forgive you for that.
Yeah, maybe in my future there's some science-themed music. And I have a new blog on Psychology Today. It's called The Optimalist, and I write as a blogger for Huffington Post, which I'm really psyched about.
Awesome.
Lots more to come.
And how about you, Casey Cole?
Fun. Well, my Oppenheimer book, Something Incredibly Wonderful Happened, my title, is coming out from the University of Chicago Press, paper and electronic, finally, with the subtitle Frank Oppenheimer and His Astonishing Exploratorium. And that institution is moving, so that's going to be a great thing. What else? I'm writing 2 books. I'm on sabbatical next year. One of them is
Exciting.
The Girlfriend's Guide to the Cosmos, which would be kind of a chatty, snarky, and the other one is what we were talking about largely, why people are stupid, the science behind the insanity. But it's not just the Republicans, it's all of us have this lizard brain, this problem with that. And also, especially as time gets shorter, the less time we have to think about things, the more mistakes we make and the bigger the consequences.
Well, I can't wait until you write it so I can read it. And Tim Lee.
So I'm going to be, next week I'll be in Orlando doing shows. And then all August I'm in Edinburgh in the UK, doing the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And you can check out my act online, which is a blend of science and comedy. Or Twitter, or wherever, Facebook, YouTube Comedian. And then I have a DVD available on my website, which is youtubecomedian.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you guys again for being here. You can talk nerdy to me anytime. My producer wrote that. Speaking of which, you should check out my regular video column on the Huffington Post. You can just go to HuffPost Science and click on Talk Nerdy to me to see some of the recent videos that I've done. I recently did one about the science of prayer, which got me a whole mess of hate mail. And coming up soon, I'm going to be talking about cannibalism. Gross. Yeah. I want to also thank our Point contributors, Linda Darling-Hammond, author of The Flat World in Education, How America's Commitment to Equity Will Determine Our Future, Chris Mooney, whose new book is The Republican Brain, The Science of Why They Deny Science and Reality, and Phil Plait, author of the Bad Astronomy blog on discovermagazine.com. And thank you all for watching The Point.